Hey everyone, I'm Amethescent, and welcome to my first official devlog. Let's get started. Now, you could probably already tell from the title or the thumbnail, but I'm making a Five Nights at Freddy's fan game. I know that these kinds of games are pretty oversaturated. I've seen quite a few myself, but I'm going to make one anyway. I love FNAF and have for several years. I'd even go as far as to say that it was one of the biggest things that got me into game design, without me even realizing it. It's true. I remember myself as a child writing up notes on what makes a good horror game, and I referenced the FNAF games a lot in that. At that time, I didn't even know how to make games, but now I do. So, in a way, this is like fulfilling the dream of the young child inside of me. As with all my games, I started out creating a list of general ideas that I created from the time I first had the idea to when I finally decided to start making it. But since it took so long for me to finally start working on the game, I ended up scrapping almost all the ideas, or changing them quite a bit. I originally wanted it to be a top-down 2D game, but I changed my mind because I feel like horror games just feel so much scarier when the threat is right in your face. And up until now, I have yet to make a 3D game, and I think it would be a good challenge. However, I didn't want it to be exactly like FNAF, so I'm going to try to add some variety to the gameplay. Of course, it'll have the classic office and checking for animatronics, but I also want there to be sections where the player gets up and moves around. Basically, this is how I want each night to play out gameplay-wise. 1. The night starts and Phone Guy speaks to the player. 2. The player does the usual FNAF stuff, checking cameras, closing doors, managing the power, etc. Pretty typical for a FNAF game. This is where the loop starts to deviate, however. For my FNAF game, the power will have to go down a lot faster. The player will have to manage it the best they can, but inevitably it will go out. However, this isn't necessarily the end for the player, like it is in other FNAF games, which leads me to 3. The power goes out, and the player is required to get up and move around in order to progress the night. 4. The player must navigate around the building, hiding when necessary, until they can find the generator and switch the power back on. And 5. The player returns to the office and continues the night. Then it repeats from 2. Obviously, this is not perfect. So far, I've barely even gotten into the engine for this game, so none of my ideas, mechanics-wise, have been tested. I've already thought up of quite a few problems that could likely arise from this. This is the gameplay loop, and everything else are either issues I've found with certain aspects, solutions for those issues, or possible additions. So this part is still very much in progress, and I won't know for certain what will and will not work until I actually get into coding and setting up the gameplay. Next, I want to talk about the bread and butter of the progress I made for this game, and that's the animatronic designs. There are 4 that I designed in total, but the ones in the speed paint being shown right now are the main 2. When I first had the idea to make this game, I knew that I wanted a cat animatronic. I wanted him to be kind of a prankster, gray and white, and wear a bandana. I only kept the first 2. Gray and white may be realistic for a cat, but for a children's entertainment center? I assume bright colors would be the way to go for the 2 major animatronics, since kids like bright colors. So I made him blue instead. I am aware that there's another fairly popular FNAF fan game that features a blue cat as one of its animatronics, but I forgot about that. Yeah, I didn't even remember Five Nights at Candy's until after I had already committed to my version. Despite being a huge FNAF fan, I'm not exactly well versed in FNAF. I think my version is different enough to not be an exact copy though, so I'm keeping him. Drawing anthropomorphic animals is a bit outside my comfort zone, so I did struggle, particularly with the faces of the animatronics. The bodies were pretty easy though. I was referencing specifically the toy animatronics when designing these, and the only real animal part of FNAF animatronics are their heads. The rest is pretty humanoid. I wanted the 2 main animatronics to have some kind of entertainer theme. For the cat, I still intended for him to be a prankster, so the role of magician felt like a natural progression. A magician could easily pull pranks, right? So he's the magician of the 2, and I gave him some design elements to reflect that. I started out with a bow tie and top hat and was going to leave it at just that, but it felt too similar to Freddy Fazbear, so I gave him some gloves and a suit jacket as well. But I didn't want to overdo it too much because, if you hadn't noticed, FNAF animatronics don't usually wear many clothes. Here's my mood board for him in case anyone is interested. These boards are a huge part of my design process when it comes to any creative project. I also made this reference sheet for him. You'll notice that this one looks a bit different design-wise. Hopefully it looks more animatronic-y. This first drawing I did was just supposed to be sort of a promotional art type thing. In-universe, I mean. Like how Chuck E. Cheese has the animatronic version and the cartoon version. This is a lot closer to what he will look like in-game. A lot of time went into this one specifically because I not only had to draw the outer visible part, but also the endoskeleton. I wanted it to be at least somewhat realistic, but I'm no engineer. You'll also notice that this one is a lot more detailed, showing different angles and close-ups. This is what I'll be using as a reference to make a 3D model of him to use in the game. I do have some experience creating 3D characters in Blender, but it was never for a game. I'll be able to apply a lot of the techniques I already know, but I'll also have to learn quite a lot to adjust it for use in a game. Hopefully, in my next devlog, I'll be able to show at least one fully made 3D model. Currently, this guy doesn't have a name. If you have any suggestions, feel free to let me know in the comments. The cat animatronic is the main one, but I also wanted him to have a partner or co-host. I wasn't sure what animal though. I knew I was going to make at least one of my animatronics a bird, but I wanted that to be a different animatronic. So I racked my brain, trying to think of an animal that would fit this role, and I came up with a bunny. Yeah, I know, so original. But then again, this game is just for fun, and if I want a bunny animatronic, I'm going to make one. Don't worry, she's nothing like Bonnie. To contrast with the cat animatronic, I made her pink, and I also gave her the role of a clown. It just felt so obvious. Clowns are children's entertainers, but they're also really creepy, so it's perfect for a FNAF game. Here's the mood board for her. It's a lot more than the cat animatronic's mood board, mostly because clowns aren't very uniform like magicians are. Clowns have their staples, of course, but there's so many kinds and looks. I had a lot of fun drawing her, and I think she's probably the most visually interesting of them all. I added a bunch of different patterns to her limbs, extra clothing details, and clown face paint. For her personality, I'm thinking she'll be the excitable crazy type. Pretty on par for a clown. Here is her reference sheet. I just took what I already had for the cat animatronic and built off of that. They have pretty much the same endoskeleton and body shape, so I really only had to change the head and colors. For her name, I was considering Giggles or something similar. I'm not exactly sold on it yet, so if you have any better ideas, you can also let me know in the comments. The last two animatronics were designed very recently, so they don't have finished reference sheets yet. For the third animatronic, I chose a Humanoid Receptionist design. An animatronic that wouldn't be an entertainer like the first two, but one who greets and serves guests, schedules parties, and does other miscellaneous tasks. You know, really taking out the human aspect of things. Her design had some problems, however. You could say that I suffered from being too used to drawing humans. Her face basically looked way too much like a human to pass as a robot. I had to go back to it several times before I just decided to make her design full-on robot. Which means no eyebrows, no pupils, and a robot mouth. It kinda makes sense lore-wise too, I think. Why spend a lot of money trying to make the Receptionist animatronic realistic when that money could go towards the two main attractions? I also designed her with a wheel. The idea was that she would likely be moving around the most out of all the animatronics during the day, moving from table to tend to guests and such. Wheels would help an animatronic get around quickly compared to large, clunky legs. Now, I know there are some FNAF animatronics with wheels, but I don't like how they look. That was when my brother reminded me of that one robot from Star Wars, so that was what I was referencing when I was designing my animatronic's lower body. This is her mood board. I also don't have a name for her yet. I'm thinking something more robotic, or an acronym that stands for something, but I haven't sat down to come up with names yet. For the final animatronic, I went back to the idea of a bird. At first, I was thinking a seagull, but after designing the first two, I didn't feel like it would fit. So I began researching other birds, eventually coming upon this wonderful creature. Look at it. It's so perfect. It's called a patoo. I don't know how well known this animal is, but I recently saw it and loved it. It's so creepy to me with its large mouth and pitch black eyes, but I felt like animatronics and kids mascots in general are usually very recognizable animals. So this animatronic is more so a mix between a patoo and an owl, but in universe it's just going to be called an owl. I specifically referenced a barn owl when designing this. The animatronic is fairly different from the others. He's not a performer, he's not even supposed to really show up at all or entertain kids. He's a security animatronic, always looking out for potential threats and swiftly taking care of them. Once again, I struggled quite a lot with the face. It just didn't look creepy enough. I wanted to include elements of an owl as well as a patoo. I think I got it down, and there are some design elements I really like, but aren't necessarily shown very well. You'll notice that his neck is a bit longer than the other animatronics. The idea is that the neck will be able to extend to maybe twice its height, allowing this animatronic to see farther distances, and it can turn its head a full 360 degrees around. Also, I want this animatronic to be much taller than the others. Perhaps you can tell from his longer limbs, but I intend for him to be at least a foot taller than the others. Perhaps around 7 to 8 feet. Here's his mood board. Honestly, I think his design is the weakest of the 4. I just feel like it could be better, more interesting. But I just don't know. My brother suggested giving him a bow tie and changing his arm wings to back wings. I'm not sure if I like it better or worse. I'm open to some design ideas for him. In fact, I'm open to that for all the animatronics I designed. He doesn't have a name either. That's pretty much the bulk of what I've done so far. I also did quite a few smaller things as well. I decided on the location, which is just going to be some kind of birthday party establishment. Furthermore, I created a list of rooms that will be in the game and a mood board for the place, just to give myself an idea for how I want the place to look. Then I got a good amount of progress on the lore, which is, in my opinion, the most important part. And finally, I followed the How to Make 3D Games in Godot tutorial by Brackies to get me used to how 3D games are made. And that's pretty much all. I apologize that there's not much game-y stuff in this first devlog, but I always spend a large amount of time in the planning and design phase so I can get it just right. I'm pretty close to being finished. The designs, lore, and game loop are pretty much finalized, so I'm confident enough to start working in Engine. So for my next devlog, you can be fairly certain that I'll talk about things like 3D modeling and coding. My plan for the next devlog is to have all the designs finalized, reference sheets made, and I want to have started modeling one of the animatronics. I also want to start working in Engine, maybe block out the map and start coding the AI and gameplay loop with some animatronic stand-ins. We'll see how much of that I'll be able to do before the next devlog. I'll try to do another one within a month or 2, so stay tuned for that. I don't usually make devlogs because I'm never entirely sure that I will finish my games, and I don't want to make false promises. But I wanted to try this out, and who knows, maybe these devlogs will incentivize me to finish this game. No promises, but here's hoping. But anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already to see more of this kind of content. Take care, and farewell.